Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. One more time. Please subscribe to our channel. Please hit the notification bell. Leave a comment if you want to leave a comment. Check us out on Fridays on our live. Check out our website at www.legendofthesuperstitionmountains.com. Additionally, out there on Prime Video, you can rent, you can download Sunsets, the documentary film. It's actually really good. We're getting really great reviews on this. So that's about it. So let's just get into the story. And I hope everybody had a great weekend. And this helps everybody ease into their work week because much like the Boomtown Rats, I don't like Mondays. But we do have Chasing Legends. This story goes back quite a ways. The story article said the 1840s the Spanish were in this area. I would think it was more the 1740s. So in the 1740s the Spanish were in the area, what's called the Thunder River Canyon area by the Grand Canyon. And they had found some gold. They worked their way up into Nevada, finding a number of different spots. But word had passed around about those excursions into the area. And a number of prospectors had been back in there. And they'd found some pretty good gold. Now, it's pretty much a sandstone, reddish kind of sandstone area. But they said there was gold. They found a lot of float down through there. So a gentleman by the names of Ames Hardill, around 1880, hears from prospectors about this area, decides he'll go looking. They said it's a rough area, but you look around, you can find some. So he figures he's going to go and spend some time up there and look around for where this gold's coming from because it has to have a source. So he goes up in the canyons. He's kind of panning here and there. He's not really finding much of anything. But while he's working his way through, he looks up, and there in the sandstone, there's some old houses, little adobe houses up in the cliffs. And there's a larger group, so he goes up just to explore that. He's having no other luck. And he gets up in there, and he starts looking around, poking around, and he finds a couple of, they're basically debris piles around the area. He finds some pottery and stuff, and then he finds some nuggets. He finds quite a few nuggets. Anywhere, he says, basically they were from a pea size up to a walnut size nuggets. He realizes those people wouldn't have had much to do with gold. So they probably just picked it up, used it for ornamentation or things here and there. And there was pieces of turquoise, but he said the turquoise was pretty low grade, so he disposed and just knocked it aside. He went pretty thoroughly through all the ruins. Didn't really find anything else, but he realized the gold was coming from somewhere in the area, so it made him get back into the area. So he started looking at some of the tributary, smaller canyons dumping in. And one day he was about ready to give up, and he knew he was getting lower on supplies, and he went in and found this crack between these boulders, and he started working down in there in the sand. And he came up with a couple of these pieces, chunks that was able to break off out of the sandstone or down below the sandstone, and it was this very light purple, smoky-looking quartz. And when he started breaking these chunks up, he said they literally would break up in your hand. It was full of tons of free gold. He said literally half the weight of the rock was gold. And he found he literally could just break it off, just smash the stuff up. And he was getting this gold and just started putting it in put it in jars and stuff he had with him. He spent 4 or 5 days there, and he realized he accumulated more gold than he had in his entire life. He'd actually accumulated quite a lot of gold. He thought, this has been like such a great, but he has no more supplies. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to pack out of here, load up my burros with everything I've got, because he has basically 2 burros with him, and now they're packed down with gold. And he says, I'm just going to get out of here, go resupply, and then I'm going to come back because I'm sure there's more. I think the vein was 18 inches, and he said it was an 18-inch vein, and it was running down. He was going to need some drill bits and stuff to open up because he couldn't get much further back. So he said, I'll come back better prepared and get some more gold. As he's leaving, he just packs up. He starts to leave the canyon, and 20 Paiutes come down in. And he said there was about 20 of them, and they sit up on the ridge. He has no way to get by them. So he starts just to go up by them, just like, hey, I'm just through here. He said, there was no trouble with anybody indigenous in the area. And they asked him what he was doing around there. And he said he'd been fishing. He was passing through. He'd been doing some fishing. They asked him if he was prospecting for gold. He said, I looked around. I didn't really find anything, but I'm just moving on. I'm done here. They asked him if he'd been up in the ruins, if he'd been digging around, if he was taking anything from the ruins that's sacred. There's burial grounds. And he was like, no, I'm not messing with any of that stuff. I was just down in here, did this, basically doing a little bit of fishing. But yeah, I didn't find anything of consequence. I'm just going to be moving on. Sorry to bother you guys. And he said they actually believed him and let him pass on through. So he moves on, and he actually does pretty well. He becomes pretty successful with his haul. I think he ends up buying a sheep ranch and having a family, making a number of investments. But as he leaves and this all is occurring, he works with another prospector, another individual, in a couple of his investments, because there was a silver mine he invested in that actually went upside down on him. But a man named Joe Valdez, or not Joe Landez, I'm sorry. And this is in the late 1880s. So it's been about almost 10 years. He tells Landez, I'm never going back to this spot. I pulled a lot of gold out of there. And he said, it's made me pretty comfortable. So he tells Landez, you should go back down there. And he told him the area. And he said, it's really hard to find. You'll find placer and you'll find some gold. But there's this one spot. And if you can find the spot in this wedge between these rocks, a sandstone, and get back in there, take some tools, there's more gold than you're ever going to need. And he said there's plenty there. It breaks down easy. He tells him the whole story. Landez thinks this sounds like a good idea. He's going to supply up, and he'll head up in there. And so Landez heads into the area. He's pretty frustrated at first because he's finding nothing. He's going through, he's plastering, he's not really coming up with anything to speak of. He goes up, looks over the kind of the ruins areas, kind of looks through that stuff, isn't really finding anything. He's realizing, I don't know, everything seems, he's in the right area, but nothing seems to be following right into the directions he's been given. So he's getting more and more frustrated, and one day he's in a tributary canyon, and there's a spot with sandstone, and he starts digging into these piles of sand that have built up, and he's digging through, and he finds this piece of quartz. And it's like a smoky quartz with a very purple, it's very low-grade quartz. But he takes it and looks at it, and it's about big enough to hold in his hand. He smacks it against the rock, it breaks up, and it's just full of gold. Now, he said it wasn't like wire gold or anything like that. It was this weird, sharp-edged gold. It was very different than any gold he'd ever seen come out of anything. And he said it was just completely different. It kind of threw him off. But then he went in and broke off a couple more pieces and realized it's just loaded. First day he had like a 2-gallon can, and he fills it with almost pure raw gold from this thing. So he figures, I'm going to spend some time here, and I'm going to get what I can and what I can reach in here. But it keeps bugging him because he realizes this doesn't fit the description he's told. But he keeps digging. He gets to the point he realizes he's run out of supplies, but he probably has another week. But he manages there's some trout in the creeks there, so he managed to get a couple trout. But then he finally kills a buck, and he has a deer, so he thinks he's got some venison, he might be okay. And he hangs it out in a spot down in the canyon, let it air, and he thinks he's all right. And then one day he's walking back from camp, and he thinks he's going to be fine for that week. And he sees heeled prints of the boots. And he's like, that's not for me. And he realized whoever's boots it was literally walked right by his camp. So it bothers him so much because he hasn't heard anybody, doesn't know of anybody there. Nobody kind of stuck around to look for him. They didn't touch anything in his camp. He follows the path that the boots seemed to take and finds up at the top of the ridge that they had tied up a horse. And then they'd rode off. So now he's thinking, okay, you know what? I might have to finish up here because there might be someone in the area. And if they know what I'm doing or anything about what I got, I'm in trouble. So he takes all the gold he has. He clears away his fire pit. He buries it in a hole under his fire pit, then puts his fire pit back over it and starts using it to cook again. Next day or so, he's getting more, but it bothers him. So one day he's getting ready to go back to his camp, and he decides to follow the ridge line. And he follows it, and then something causes him to look, and he realizes this is a good spot for like an ambush or someone to kind of watch the trail and stuff. So he goes over there and starts looking around, and then he looks down and sees 7 men with some cattle down in the base of the canyon. They're probably 3/4 of a mile to mile south of him. And he's watching them, and he realizes these are outlaws, these are rustlers. They probably stole these cattle. And he's like, this is not good for me. I don't need this on top of any other problems I have with all this gold. They won't think twice about killing me and taking the gold. So he realizes, okay, I got to be very quiet. He walks back, brushes out his tracks from himself for almost all the way back to camp. Realizes, okay, I got a day or so. I'm just going to start getting things cleaned up and squared away, hide the spot I'm at in case I want to come back, and that's that. He is coming back to camp after the day after that, the next night, and he sees his fires burning bright. And when he gets just outside his camp, he realizes there's 3 men sitting there, fires going, they're cooking and eating and drinking coffee. And he can't recognize if they're from that group from before. He's looking around. He doesn't think anyone else is around. So he finally pulls out his shotgun. He walks into the camp, says, I got you all covered. Nobody make a move. What are you doing in my camp? One of the men, the biggest of the men, he's sitting there, and Joe says he's probably in his 40s. He says, hey, we don't mean no harm. We'd come through, realized your camp was pretty bare. Didn't seem like you had much to eat. We were looking for a place to set a camp for the night. We didn't mean to bother you or anything. Figured maybe it was a cold camp, but you're more than welcome to share food with us. Joe listens to him talk for a while, and he says he didn't know what it was, but for some reason he just decided to believe them, that they were passing through or for whatever reason. So he sat down, had food, had coffee. They asked him if he'd been prospecting. He said he did for a while, but he said he really didn't find much color anywhere. He said he'd been up and down the canyon. He gave him the same story that Ames had told, the Paiutes earlier. So he's like, yeah, there's nothing really in here. But he said, I'll try my luck somewhere else. And they said, well, do you think you'll ever be back? And he thought about it and said, no, you know what? I think I'm pretty much done with this area. It cost me too much to work in here. I think I'm done with it. And the older gentleman who was sitting there turned to him and said, well, we got an operation, something we're going to be doing some work around here. So we prefer that nobody else was around. And we would prefer it if you never told anybody you even saw any of us around here. And he decided that sounded about as good of a deal as he could make at the time. And he told them, yeah, no problem. I'm not probably going to run into anybody. And if anybody asks, I'll say I didn't see a soul out here. He said, in fact, I'm not going to talk to anybody much about where I was. And they all had an agreement. The men, before it got too late, so they were going to make camp down a ways, which he suspected they already had a camp. And they got up and they rode out. Landez sits there and thinks for a minute and realizes he's got to give it some time, but he's going to dig up and get his gold and pack himself out of there. He got $200,000 of gold out of there. He figured that area he was in was not the original area where the gold came from. That was what he had gotten was a pocket. It never had the vein. It did not have the same circumstances that he'd been told by Hardill. So he was figuring he found another pocket, so the area probably had to be littered with pockets like this. But he realized with these men and the circumstances, it was best he get moving. So he dug all his gold up, packed it up, cleared up his camp. There wasn't much of a sign that he'd been there. Took his gold out, headed back out, and did very well. He bought a sheep ranch, raised it, had a wife, ended up having 5 kids. I think they said it was 3 boys and 2 girls. Did very well in life and retired. And it was later that he gave people this instance down by the Thunder River Canyon, that's where he'd found this gold. So somewhere out there, and I looked up and looked through several other places to find if there was anything mentioning this, but I saw nothing else. Now, they said the instance of the Spanish they could not attest to, but with Hardill, there were stories of Hardill and some other prospectors finding gold down in there. And there actually had been something of a small gold rush in the area, but nobody was finding anything. Which Landez said the problem is, it's not, when you get in the sandstone, it's not a naturally area you would think gold's naturally occurring in. It's a very unusual circumstance. It's under the sand, and it's just in these, what he found was in pockets, but it's very different kind of gold. And he said it was in that light purple quartz matrix, and it just crushed. You could literally, he said some of it, like Hardill said, you could break up with your bare hands and break the gold out of it. And it was very sharp pointed, very weird shaped gold. So there you go. There's a story. I was at this story that I found, most of the information came from Maurice Kildare. So if you're ever looking for the story in an old magazine or whatnot, it was one of his stories. And it was in his files with his notes and a number of maps of the area. And I was kind of looking at it thinking that's kind of an interesting story and area. I don't know specifically the restrictions in the area would be today, but it does sound like an area that almost anybody could get lucky, because it would just be pick a spot and dig in the sand and see if you can hit that matrix of that quartz that has that gold in it. So there you go. There's this week's story. Hope you enjoyed it. I kind of had fun with it because I read it and realized it was 2 stories literally wrapped into one. I wish I could have found out more about the Spanish expedition, but it listed the Spanish expedition to be in 1840, which would have been a little late for them to be up in there and setting mine claims and so forth. It could be possible, but 1840, that's more the Mexican independence and that type of period. So with them settling other mines in the area, I think it would have been earlier, probably 1740, and the writer probably got that wrong. But everything else kind of held up, and it had postscripts that there were interviews done with the other principal 2 people. Hardill, who was in his 60s when he found his, and then Landez later, who talked to a number of people and told them there was probably nothing really left at where he was, but what to look for in the area specifically. So there you go, the story of the Thunder River Canyon Gold. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a great rest of the next of the week. I hope you do yourself a favor and pick up a copy of Sunsets. Amazon Prime. We'll get it out to Amazon soon enough and some other distributors, but well worth the watch and the wait. See a lot of familiar faces in there. Until the next time, though, always remember, most important thing, right? I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.